Gideon Blackwood's fist connected with Evelyn Mercer's face before she even finished saying no. She hit the floor hard, the side of her cheek split open against the edge of the wooden table, and the sound of it, that wet, hollow crack, was the kind of sound you don't forget. He stood over her, breathing like a man who had just finished a job he'd been looking forward to, his rings still slick, his boots inches from her face. "You don't get to refuse me," he said. "Not in my house, not on my land, not anywhere on this earth." She tried to get up. He put his boot on her hand. "If you've ever wondered what real courage looks like, not the clean kind from stories, but the ugly, bleeding, trembling kind, stay with me. Like this video, drop a comment with your city or country so I can see how far this story has traveled, and follow the channel so you never miss what comes next. This one is going to stay with you." The morning had started ordinary enough, which was the cruelest part. Evelyn had been up before dawn, the way she always was, moving through Gideon Blackwood's kitchen with the quiet efficiency of someone who had learned that silence was the safest language in that house. She had the coffee boiling and the biscuits in the oven by the time the first gray light came through the east window, and she was halfway through slicing the salt pork when she heard his boots on the stairs. Heavy, deliberate, the kind of footsteps that told you his mood before he reached the bottom. She didn't look up. That was the first rule she'd learned working in his house. Don't look up until he speaks. Don't give him anything to react to. "Evelyn." She kept her eyes on the cutting board. "Breakfast will be ready in 10 minutes, Mr. Blackwood." "Leave it." She set the knife down, turned. He was standing in the doorway in his good shirt, the dark one he wore when he was doing business, his hair combed back. He looked almost civilized when he dressed like that. Almost. "Sit down," he said. "Sir, the biscuits will burn if I said sit down." She sat. There were only 2 chairs at the kitchen table. She took the one nearest the door, though she couldn't have explained why. Some animal instinct she hadn't known she possessed until she started working in this house. Gideon pulled the other chair around so it faced hers directly, and he sat with his elbows on his knees close enough that she could smell the tobacco on him. He had a way of taking up space that felt deliberate, like he wanted you to feel the edges of the room pressing in. "I've been thinking about the future," he said. She waited. "This ranch needs a woman in it, properly. Not just someone to cook and clean." He looked at her the way he looked at cattle he was considering purchasing, assessing, calculating, already certain of the outcome. "I've decided you'll marry me. End of the month." The silence lasted maybe 3 seconds. "No," she said. He blinked. "Just once." "What did you say?" "No, Mr. Blackwood." Her voice was steadier than she expected. She hadn't planned this, hadn't rehearsed it. The word had simply come out of her, as natural and unstoppable as a reflex. "I won't marry you." His face didn't change at first. That was what scared her most. The stillness. Men who got loud right away were manageable. You could see the storm coming. With Gideon, the stillness was the storm. "You're an orphan," he said very quietly. "You have no family, no land, no money, no prospects. Everything you eat, everything you wear, the bed you sleep in, I pay for all of it, and you're telling me no." "Yes, sir, I'm telling you no." He stood up so slowly that she almost relaxed, almost thought maybe he'd accept it. "Turn around, go back upstairs, let the moment pass." Men like him didn't always. His fist caught her across the left cheek before she could finish the thought. She went sideways off the chair, caught the edge of the table on the way down, and hit the floor in a heap. The pain was enormous, a white flash that swallowed the room, and for a moment she couldn't hear anything except a high, hollow ringing. She was on her hands and knees trying to get her bearings when she felt his boot come down on her left hand. Not kicking, just pressing, controlled. He wanted her to understand the weight of him. "You work for me," he said, from somewhere above her. "You live because I allow it. And when I decide you'll be my wife, that is not a question. That is a fact." She turned her face up to look at him. She didn't plan that either. It was possibly the stupidest thing she'd done in her life, meeting his eyes from the floor. But she did it. "Then you'll have to drag me to the altar," she said, "because I won't walk there." That was when he hit her the second time. The next hour was the longest of Evelyn Mercer's 23 years. He didn't beat her into unconsciousness. That would have been simpler in its way. Instead, he was methodical about it, the way he was methodical about everything on his ranch. He made sure she understood why it was happening. He explained it to her between strikes like a man correcting a stubborn horse. He told her she would come around, told her this was a temporary condition, her resistance, and that he had broken harder wills than hers. Afterward, he had two of his ranch hands lock her in the bedroom at the end of the hall, the one with the single window that faced the yard, and he told them she was not to come out until she was ready to give him the answer he was owed. The room smelled like old wood and boot polish. There was a bed with a gray blanket, a wash basin with no water in it, and a small window with a rusted latch. Evelyn sat on the floor beside the bed because she couldn't make herself get onto it. Her left eye was swelling shut. Her ribs ached with every breath. The cut on her cheek had dried into a stiff, pulling thing. She sat and she breathed and she did not cry, because crying required energy she didn't have, and because some stubborn part of her refused to spend whatever she had left on tears in his house. She had come to work for Gideon Blackwood 18 months ago, and she had known from the beginning he was not a kind man. Everyone in Black Ridge knew it. He owned more land than any 3 other ranchers combined. He controlled the water rights on the Eastern Range. He had the sheriff in his pocket, the bank manager at his supper table, and enough hired hands on his payroll that no one in the territory was foolish enough to challenge him directly. She had come to him because she was 19, freshly orphaned, and had exactly $17 to her name. She had told herself she would stay a year, save enough to move somewhere else, start over. Then a year became 14 months, and 14 months became 18, and somehow the door had gotten harder and harder to see. She hadn't expected this, which was its own kind of foolishness, she supposed. She should have expected it. She should have left before it got to this. She was examining the window. The latch was rusted, but not beyond movement, and the drop to the yard was maybe 8 feet, maybe 9, when she heard voices outside. 2 of the ranch hands posted just below. She stepped back from the window. 8 feet, possibly broken ankle. Nowhere near the road. 2 armed men below. She sat back down on the floor and breathed. Cole Donovan had come to the Blackwood Ranch that morning to settle a simple matter, a fence line dispute on the northern border that Gideon's men had been pushing at for 3 weeks. Cole's property sat on 40 acres of rocky foothills at the edge of the territory, small by any measure, and Blackwood's men had been grazing cattle on his eastern pasture without permission, and the last time Cole had raised the issue with the foreman, the man had laughed and told him to take it up with Mr. Blackwood personally. So here he was. He'd been waiting in the yard for close to 40 minutes when he heard it. He wasn't sure what it was the first time, a sound from inside the house, something heavy, something wrong. He'd told himself it was furniture. Ranch houses had all kinds of sounds. He'd kept his hat in his hands and watched the dust settle between the fence posts. The second time he heard it, he stood up from the hitching post. The third time, he was already walking toward the house. One of the hands near the porch stepped into his path. "Whoa now, Mr. Blackwood's busy." "I can hear that," Cole said. "You need to wait in the yard." Cole looked at the man. He was taller than Cole by 2 inches, broader through the shoulders, and he had the relaxed posture of someone who was used to his size settling arguments without further discussion. "Move," Cole said. The man blinked. "Son, you don't want to—" Cole went around him and through the front door and mud. He'd been inside the Blackwood house only once before, 3 years ago, for some territorial meeting. Meeting Gideon had hosted. He remembered it being bigger than it needed to be, the kind of house built to impress rather than to live in. Wood paneling, too many mounted heads on the walls. He moved through the entry hall toward the sound and came through the kitchen doorway and stopped. Gideon Blackwood was standing with his arm raised, and on the floor in front of him was a young woman. Her face was turned away, but Cole could see the blood on the side of her head, and the way she was holding herself, curled slightly to the side, protecting her ribs, told him everything he needed to know about what had been happening before he walked in. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Gideon lowered his arm slowly and turned to look at Cole with an expression of extraordinary irritation, like a man interrupted in the middle of important paperwork. "Donovan," he said, "get out of my house." Cole looked at the woman on the floor. She had turned her face toward him now, one eye swollen nearly shut, a cut across her cheekbone, her lip bleeding. She was looking at him the way people look when they've stopped expecting help but can't quite stop hoping for it. "Get up," Cole said to her. She stared at him. "Can you get up?" he said. "She's not going anywhere," Gideon said, and his voice had gone flat and cold in a way that meant he was very close to making a permanent decision about Cole Donovan. This is my house and my business, and you will leave right now, or I will have you removed in pieces. Cole crossed the kitchen in 4 strides and hit Gideon Blackwood with a right hand that had 32 years of quiet hard work behind it. The rancher went down like something had been switched off inside him, not dramatically, not with any kind of cinematic collapse, just a sudden removal of all the force that had been animating him, and then the floor. He looked smaller that way. Cole stood over him for a moment, breathing. His knuckles hurt. He hadn't hit anyone in 6 years, and the specific pain of it came back to him like a song he'd almost forgotten. He turned back to the woman. "I'm Cole Donovan," he said. "I've got a horse outside. Can you walk?" She was staring at Gideon's unmoving form. Her expression was not what Cole would have expected. Not relief, not shock. It was something more complicated than either, like someone watching a dam hold against water they'd expected to drown in. "He'll wake up," she said. "I know. His men are outside." "I know that too." She looked at Cole. "Why did you do that?" He didn't have an especially good answer for that. He'd done it because a man was beating a woman, and he had walked in while it was happening. That seemed like sufficient reason at the time. It still did. "Do you want to stand here and talk about it?" he said. "Or do you want to leave?" She got to her feet. She had to use the table to do it, and she moved like someone reassembling herself from the inside out, deliberate, effortful, determined not to show him how much she was hurting. He noticed that. He didn't say anything about it. "My name is Evelyn Mercer," she said. "I know who you are." She almost looked surprised. "How?" "Small territory," he said. "Come on." Getting out of the yard was not as simple as Cole had made it sound. There were 4 of Gideon's men between the house and the gate. 2 he'd passed on his way in, 2 more who had drifted over from the barn when they heard the commotion inside. Cole came through the front door with Evelyn behind him, and all 4 of them stopped what they were doing. The biggest one, the same man who had tried to stop Cole at the porch, looked from Cole to Evelyn to the open front door. "Where's Mr. Blackwood?" he said. "Resting," Cole said, and kept walking. The man stepped into his path again. "Tom, Ray, get over here." Cole stopped. He looked at the 4 men arranged between him and the gate. He had a pistol on his hip that he was genuinely bad at using quickly. He was a working rancher, not a gunfighter, and he knew his limitations. He was also aware that Evelyn was 2 steps behind him and that her balance wasn't entirely steady. "I'm going to take this woman to see a doctor," he said. "You can let us walk out, or you can explain to Blackwood when he wakes up why you stopped her from getting medical attention. Your call." It wasn't a great argument. He knew that. But men like these, hired hands, not killers, most of them, men who worked for wages and not out of loyalty, sometimes responded to the reasonable version of a problem if you gave it to them fast enough. The big man looked at Evelyn's face, at the blood on her cheek, at the way she was holding her arm against her side. Something moved through his expression that wasn't quite shame, but was in the same county as it. He stepped aside. Cole walked through the gap without looking back. He could feel the tension behind him, the moment where any of them could have changed their minds. But he kept his pace steady and unhurried, because running communicates panic, and panic communicates vulnerability, and this was not the moment for either. His horse, a gray-brown mare named Patchy for reasons that had made more sense when she was younger, was tied to the hitching post where he'd left her. He untied her, looked at Evelyn, and said, "Can you ride?" "I've ridden before," she said, which wasn't exactly what he'd asked. He helped her up anyway. She didn't fight him on it, which told him something about how much she was hurting. She struck him as the kind of woman who fought on principle. Then he swung up behind her, took the reins, and they went through the gate at a walk that became a trot, that became a run the moment they cleared the property line. Behind them, he heard shouting start up in the yard. Then Gideon's voice, raw and furious, the voice of a man who had woken up from an unwanted sleep, bellowing something Cole couldn't quite make out over the sound of Patchy's hooves. He didn't need to make it out. The meaning was clear enough. They rode for 2 hours without stopping. Cole knew the hill country north of Black Ridge better than most. He'd spent 4 years working those ridges as a younger man, before he'd saved enough to buy his own land, and he knew the trails that didn't appear on any map, the deer paths and creek beds and old mining tracks that the territory's official roads had never bothered to acknowledge. He took every one of them he could string together, pulling northeast into the foothills, then cutting west along a ridge that would make them nearly impossible to track in the rocky ground. Evelyn rode without complaint. She held herself upright through what he was fairly certain was a significant amount of pain, and she didn't ask where they were going, which he appreciated. There would be time for questions later. Right now, distance was the only thing that mattered. He was aware of her breathing. He was directly behind her on the saddle, and he couldn't help but notice the way it caught sometimes. A small, sharp intake when the horse moved wrong over rough ground. The kind of breath that meant ribs. Possibly cracked, possibly worse. There wasn't much he could do about it on horseback, so he found the smoothest paths he could and tried to keep the pace from jolting. After a while, she said, "Where are we going?" "I've got a cabin up on the north face," he said. "It's been empty a couple of years. It's far enough." Far enough for what? Far enough that he'd have to decide it was worth the trouble to come after us. She was quiet for a moment. "He'll decide that." "Probably," Cole said. "We'll deal with it when we get there." She turned her head slightly, enough that he could see the damaged side of her face in profile. "You don't seem very worried." "I'm moderately worried," he said. "I just don't see how worrying more would help." Something shifted in her expression. Not quite a smile. Her face wasn't in a condition for that, but the edges of one. They rode on. The cabin materialized out of the tree line just as the afternoon light was going amber, and Cole felt a small private relief when he saw it was still standing. He hadn't been up here in 18 months, and mountain cabins had a way of losing arguments with weather and wildlife when nobody was watching. It had held up well enough. The roof had some moss on it, and one of the shutters on the east window was hanging crooked, but the walls were solid and the door was still on its hinges, which were the two things that mattered most. He helped Evelyn down from the horse and watched her absorb the weight of her own body onto her feet. Her jaw went tight. She looked at the cabin, then at him. "How long were you planning to stay?" she said. "Long as it takes," he said. He meant it as a practical answer. He could see from her face that she was working out what it meant, and he let her do that without adding to it. He got a fire going in the stone hearth before anything else. She was shivering, which he suspected was more shock than cold, but heat was heat. And then he found his old medical kit in the wooden box under the window where he'd left it. It was more a collection of things that had seemed useful at one time or another than a proper kit. Some clean cloth, a small bottle of carbolic, a needle and thread he hoped he wouldn't need, some dried yarrow he'd bundled himself 3 summers ago. "Come sit by the fire," he said. She sat in the chair nearest the hearth, and he pulled the other one up across from her and opened the cloth to get at the carbolic. She watched him prepare it without speaking. "This is going to sting," he said. "I assumed," she said. He cleaned the cut on her cheek first. She didn't flinch, which impressed him, though he suspected it cost her something. Then he moved to the smaller cuts on her hands. The floor, he thought, where she'd caught herself. And then carefully checked her ribs by pressing along the sides, watching her face for the location and quality of her reactions. She let him, which again told him something about how much she trusted her own endurance. "2 cracked," he said. "Maybe 3. Hard to be certain without a doctor." "I know," she said. "You've had cracked ribs before?" "Once. I was 12. Fell off a roof I had no business being on." She paused. "I'll be all right." "I know you will," he said. He wasn't flattering her. It was simply what her face told him. He wrapped her ribs as well as he could with the clean cloth, and then he dug out an old shirt from his saddlebag, clean, just worn, soft, and set it on the arm of her chair without comment. She looked at it, then at him. "There's only one bed," he said. "You take it. I'll be fine by the fire." "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to," he said. "I want to." He stood up and moved toward the door. "I'm going to see Apache and get some water. Rest if you can." He went outside and stood in the early evening air and breathed it in slowly. Patchy was drinking from the small creek that ran behind the cabin, and Cole stood beside her and thought about what he'd done and what it was likely to cost him. His 40 acres was gone, probably. Gideon would take it or ruin it through the county assessor's office. He had enough people in his pocket to manage that without breaking a sweat. The years of work Cole had put into that land, the fences he'd built post by post, the small house he'd repaired twice over, all of it was likely forfeit now. He found he cared about that less than he'd expected. He rubbed Patchy's neck and listened to the creek, and thought about the way Evelyn Mercer had met his eyes from the floor of Gideon's kitchen. Not begging, not broken, just looking, and decided he'd made the only decision he was capable of making. Whether that was good judgment or the worst mistake of his life remained to be seen. She was asleep in the chair when he came back in. She hadn't made it to the bed. She'd simply gone out where she sat, her head tilted sideways against her shoulder, her breathing uneven but present. Cole stood in the doorway for a moment, then carefully moved the second chair to block the draft from the window, put another log on the fire, and sat down on the floor with his back against the wall. He watched the fire for a while. Outside, the wind was picking up through the pines, that specific sound that meant the mountain was settling into its evening mood, not threatening, just present. He'd always liked that sound. He'd done some of his clearest thinking in rooms full of it. He thought about Gideon, about the bounty that was certainly already being arranged, about the sheriff, who owed Blackwood more favors than either of them would admit, about the two professional writers Gideon kept on retainer for exactly these kinds of situations. Cole had heard about them. Most people in the territory had heard about them, men who found people who didn't want to be found. He also thought about the woman sleeping in his chair, about the quality of her no, how completely she had meant it, how it had cost her everything she had to say one word and mean it, and she'd said it anyway. He respected that more than he had words for. Eventually, the fire burned low. He got up, moved Evelyn to the bed as carefully as he could. She stirred but didn't wake, and he took that as a mercy, pulled the blanket over her, and went back to the floor. He didn't sleep much. He didn't need to. He'd spent enough nights on hard ground that his body had made its peace with it years ago. What kept him awake wasn't discomfort. It was the voice in the back of his head, reasonable, practical, the voice that had kept him alive and solvent for 32 years, telling him that the woman in the next bed had just become the most dangerous kind of trouble a quiet man could invite into his life. And the other voice, quieter and less reasonable and entirely stubborn, that said it was already too late to do anything about that. Both of them were right. He watched the dark through the window and waited for morning. Evelyn woke before Cole did, which surprised her. She lay still for a moment in the unfamiliar bed, cataloging the damage the way you do when you've slept through the worst of the pain and the morning has brought it all back with fresh clarity. Left eye still swollen, though the complete blindness of last night had softened to a narrow, aching slit. Ribs on the right side, 2 of them, maybe 3, that fired every time she pulled a breath deeper than shallow. The cut on her cheek had crusted over in the night, pulling tight every time she moved her jaw. She turned her head carefully and looked at the room. Cole Donovan was asleep on the floor with his back against the far wall and his hat over his face, one arm crossed over his chest and the other resting loose at his side. His boots were still on. He hadn't even unrolled a blanket, just gone down where he was and stayed there, like a man accustomed to sleeping in whatever position the situation provided. She studied him for a moment. She'd known who he was, of course. The territory wasn't so large that you could work in its biggest household for 18 months without forming a picture of most of the surrounding ranchers. Cole Donovan was 40 acres on the North Ridge, a gray horse, and a reputation for keeping to himself that had apparently been thoroughly accurate right up until yesterday. She'd seen him twice before, maybe 3 times, always at a distance. He'd never struck her as remarkable in any particular direction, not rough like some of the frontier men, not soft like the merchants, just a working man going about the business of working. She revised that assessment somewhat in light of recent events. She got herself upright in increments, because that was the only way her ribs permitted, and by the time she'd made it to standing, Cole had pushed the hat off his face and was watching her from the floor. "Morning," he said, like she hadn't just witnessed him sleep fully clothed on bare wood. "Morning," she said. He got up. Not with any particular effort, just folded himself to standing in a single motion, and then he went to the hearth and started rebuilding the fire from the coals without further ceremony. "How bad?" he said, meaning her. "Manageable," she said, meaning it mostly. He didn't press it. He put water on to heat and moved around the small kitchen area with the efficiency of someone who'd been fending for himself long enough that it had become its own kind of fluency. He found some dried oats in a tin that had kept well enough, and coffee that was old but present, and he put together a breakfast that was plain and sufficient and handed her the larger portion without appearing to notice he'd done so. She noticed. They ate without much conversation. It wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It had a different quality than that, more like two people independently deciding that words could wait until the food was done. Outside, the mountain was doing its morning sounds. Birds first, then the creek, then the slow creak of pines in a wind that hadn't fully committed to a direction yet. "He'll send men," Evelyn said when her coffee was half gone. "Yes," Cole said. "Soon." "Probably already has." She looked at him. "You don't seem particularly bothered by that." "I'm bothered," he said. "I'm just not sure what being more bothered would accomplish." He turned his coffee cup in his hands, looking at it rather than her. "He won't know to look up here right away. Maybe 2 days before anyone thinks of this property. It gives us time to think." "Think about what?" "Options," he said. "There's a town called Greer's Crossing about 16 miles east. It's got a telegraph and a stage line. If you wanted to go east, Denver or further, you could be on a coach before Blackwood's men figured out which direction you'd gone." She understood what he was saying and what he wasn't saying. He was giving her the door, leaving it open, not pushing her through it, just making sure she knew it was there. "What about you?" she said. He was quiet for a moment. "I'd figure something out." "He'll take your land." "Probably," Cole said. He was going to find a reason eventually anyway. Men like him don't tolerate neighbors they can't control. He said it without any particular heat, just a flat acknowledgement of how things were. "The land's not the point right now." "What is the point?" He looked at her then, directly, and she had the sense of someone choosing words with more care than usual. "Making sure you're somewhere safe," he said. "That's the point." Evelyn set down her coffee. She looked at the fire for a long moment, thinking about Denver, or further east, and what that would mean. A new city, no money, no connections, a woman alone with a damaged face, and no references she could safely use. The arithmetic of it was not encouraging. "I'm not going to make any decisions today," she said. "I can't think straight when I hurt this much." "That's fair," Cole said. "I'll think about it tomorrow." "All right." She looked at him again. "You're a very agreeable man, Mr. Donovan." Something moved at the corner of his mouth. "Don't let it fool you," he said. "I've got opinions. I'm just waiting to see if they're useful." The second day was when they started to find out who each other actually was. It happened the way it usually does, not through any planned conversation, but through the accumulation of small things. Cole went out in the early morning to check the perimeter of the property, which was something he'd apparently done reflexively since arriving, and when he came back he found Evelyn had reorganized the food stores, discovered a forgotten bag of dried beans behind the flour, started a pot of water for laundry, and was sitting at the table cataloging everything in the medical kit with a focus that suggested she was not a woman who handled inactivity well. He stood in the doorway and looked at the results of her morning. "You didn't have to do all that," he said. "I know I didn't have to," she said. "I needed something to do." He sat down across from her. "What did you find in the kit?" She told him, item by item, not because it required discussion, but because she'd already assessed it and had thoughts about what was missing. She told him about the yarrow and its limitations, and what would work better for infected wounds, and how she'd treated 3 of the other ranch hands' injuries over the past year, because Gideon wouldn't spend money on a doctor for working men unless the alternative was losing them to gangrene. Cole listened to this with the concentrated attention of someone filing information for future use. "Where'd you learn that?" he said. "My mother," she said, "before she died. She was the closest thing to a doctor in the town we came from." She paused. "I was 11. My father lasted another 3 years before a winter took him." She said it without self-pity, just the facts, delivered clean. "Then I was on my own." Cole looked at his hands for a moment. "I was 16 when I lost mine," he said. "Fire." He didn't elaborate, and she didn't ask him to. There was something in the exchange that she recognized, the way people who had lost things early in life recognized it in each other. Not the loss itself exactly, but the particular quality of self-sufficiency it produced. The way you stopped waiting for someone else to solve problems and just started solving them. "You built your ranch yourself?" she said. "Most of it," he said. "Hired one man, friend of mine, for the big things. But mostly myself." He picked up one of the tools from the kit, a pair of small pliers he'd apparently included without being entirely sure why, and turned it over. Took 4 years to get it to a point where it felt like a real place. "And now?" He set the pliers down. "Now it might be someone else's problem," he said. He He said it the same way she'd discussed her parents, just the facts. She found herself thinking about that, about the particular kind of man who could lose something he'd spent 4 years building with his own hands and discuss it in the same even tone he'd used to discuss the weather. "Don't you want to fight for it?" she said. "I want to keep you alive," he said, in that order. She didn't know what to say to that. She wasn't used to being someone else's first consideration. It sat on her strangely, not unpleasantly, just unfamiliarly, like a piece of clothing she wasn't sure yet if it fit. On the afternoon of the second day, Cole started fixing the broken shutter. He didn't make a production of it. He just got the tools and did it, working with the quiet economy of someone who had fixed so many broken things over the years that it had become its own kind of reflex. Evelyn sat on an upturned crate nearby. Her ribs still objected to much movement, but sitting outside in the afternoon air was something she could manage, and found herself watching him work with more interest than she'd expected. "You don't have to fix that," she said. "I know," he said. He had a nail between his lips, the way her father used to do, and it distorted his voice slightly. He took the nail out to set it. "It was bothering me. We might not be here long enough to need a working shutter." "Maybe," he said. "Still bothers me." She understood that. The impulse to fix things, even when their permanence was uncertain. It was the same thing that had made her reorganize the food stores that morning. The need to impose some small order on a situation that was mostly out of her control. "Tell me about the ranch," she said. "The 40 acres. He glanced at her sideways. "Why?" "Because I'm going to sit here either way, and talking is better than not." He thought about that for a moment, then started talking. Not in any organized way. He wasn't a storyteller by nature, but in the way that people talk about places they've built with their hands, which is to say with a specificity and affection that doesn't require narrative structure. He told her about the north pasture, which got the best winter light, and where the grass came back thick every spring. About the 2 horses he'd had to sell the previous year when money got short, and the one he'd kept because she was more useful than the others, and also privately, because he'd had her for 8 years and couldn't quite make himself do it. About the fence line he'd spent an entire summer repairing, not Blackwood's contested border, a different one, the southern boundary, post by post in 90-degree heat because the previous owner had done it badly and it had never sat right with him. Evelyn listened, and she noticed that none of what he described was about what the ranch was worth or what it represented. It was all about the work itself, the specific, physical, grain-of-wood reality of a place he'd built with his own labor and intended to inhabit for the foreseeable future. "It sounds like a good place," she said. "It is," he said. Then, after a pause, "Was, maybe." "You don't know that yet." He didn't say anything. Finished the shutter, tested it twice, satisfied himself with the result. "What would you do?" he said then. "If you could go anywhere, not running, just if you had a choice." She thought about it seriously, because it was a serious question and he'd asked it like one. "Somewhere with a garden," she said. "I've always wanted a proper one. I kept a kitchen garden at my last place before Blackwood's, but it was always too small. I wanted something bigger, tomatoes, peppers, maybe some fruit trees if the climate allowed." She stopped herself. "That sounds like nothing." "Doesn't sound like nothing," Cole said. "A woman running from a powerful man's hired guns, and what she wants is a garden. That's not nothing," he said again, with a certainty she found she believed. She looked at him. I was putting his tools away, his face half turned from her, and she thought about what it said about a person, what you could read in someone's face when they were just doing a simple task and not performing anything. Cole Donovan's face said, without any of his careful words, that he was a man who took what people wanted seriously. All of it, even the things that seemed small. She filed that away. The trouble came on the 3rd morning, and it arrived in the shape of hoofbeats. Cole heard it first. His hearing had always been sharper than people expected for someone who seemed so habitually unhurried, and he came awake in a single motion that told Evelyn he was a man who had slept in uncertain places before. He was at the window before she was fully sitting up. "How many?" she said. "1 horse," he said, moving slow, not a search pattern. 1 was better than 6, but it wasn't unambiguously good. He took his rifle from the corner, a Winchester that had seen better decades but was still functional and that he apparently kept loaded out of straightforward practicality, and went to the door. Evelyn pulled on her boots, because boots were something you needed whatever happened next. The rider who came through the tree line was old, 65 at least, on a bay horse that was moving with the careful deliberateness of a very experienced animal navigating uncertain terrain. The man on its back was thin, white-haired, wearing a coat that had been good quality once and had aged into comfort. He had a medical bag strapped behind the saddle. Cole lowered the rifle slightly. "Donovan," the old man said by way of greeting. "Doc Aldridge," Cole said. "How did you know to come here?" "I didn't," the doctor said. "I was making my monthly rounds up through the hill settlements and happened to cross your North Ridge Trail, and I saw the smoke from the chimney. Figured either you'd come back or someone had moved in uninvited." He looked at Evelyn, who had appeared in the doorway behind Cole. His expression, which had been carefully neutral, tightened fractionally when he saw her face. "I see," he said quietly. "Come inside," Cole said. The doctor examined Evelyn with the brisk competence of a man who had spent 40 years seeing what people did to each other on the frontier, and he confirmed Cole's assessment of the ribs, too cracked, probably not broken through, cleaned the cut on her cheek properly with better materials than Cole's kit had provided, and declared that she would heal without lasting damage if she rested adequately and didn't do anything foolish. "Define foolish," Evelyn said. "Running from armed men through mountain terrain," Aldridge said. "Heavy lifting, hard riding, that sort of thing." "So the most likely things," she said. "Yes." He began packing his bag. He didn't look at either of them directly, which Cole recognized as the behavior of a man who had decided to be helpful but had not yet decided how much he wanted to know. "I should tell you," he said finally, when the bag was closed, "that I came through Greer's Crossing 2 days ago. There's talk." Cole went still. "What kind?" "The kind that starts with Gideon Blackwood offering money," Aldridge said. He did look at Cole now. $50. For information about the whereabouts of a young woman and the man who took her. He paused. That's how it was framed. The man who took her. As though she were a horse. "How many people heard it?" Cole said. "In Greer's Crossing, everyone." Aldridge stood, picked up his bag. "There are 2 men who rode in yesterday. Not locals. Hard-looking men with good horses and equipment. They were asking questions at the trading post when I left." He looked at Evelyn. "I believe they were hired specifically." The room was quiet for a moment. "How long do we have?" Evelyn said. "They don't know about this cabin," Cole said. "Nobody does, except—" He looked at Aldridge. "I've never spoken of it," the doctor said simply. "And I won't." He moved toward the door, then stopped. "There's something else. A man at the trading post, Horace Webb, you know him, runs the grain supply. He saw the hired men and sent word south by fast rider. He doesn't like Blackwood's methods. Hasn't for years." Aldridge looked at the wall rather than either of them. "Apparently he's not alone in that. He left shortly after, picking his way back through the trees on his careful bay horse, and Cole stood in the doorway watching him go, working through the implications. "Webb," Evelyn said from behind him. "I know who that is. He came to the ranch twice to try to renegotiate some debt Gideon had leveraged against his supply business. Gideon sent him away both times." She paused. "He seemed like a decent man." "He is," Cole said. "He's also not someone Blackwood should have made an enemy of. Webb's been in this territory 30 years. He knows everyone." "Is that useful?" "Might be." Cole closed the door and turned to face her. "It depends on whether there are enough people like him, people with legitimate grievance and enough standing to matter, who are willing to do something more than privately resent the situation." Evelyn looked at him steadily. "You're thinking about fighting him." "I'm thinking about not just running," Cole said, which was a different thing, though not as different as it sounded. She was quiet for a moment. "Tell me what you mean." He sat down. So did she, across from him, her hands flat on the table between them, and he laid out what he was thinking in the plain, unfloored way he said most things. Not as a plan yet, just as a direction. Blackwood's power was built on 3 things: money, fear, and the absence of organized opposition. The money was real and couldn't be taken directly. The fear was maintained by making examples of people who resisted, which was why no one had resisted yet. But the absence of organized opposition, that was more fragile than it looked, because it depended on people believing they were alone in their grievance. If they weren't alone. If there were enough Horace Webbs. "It's a big if," Evelyn said. "I know," Cole said. But I've been running calculations in my head since yesterday, and the alternative is either you spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder, or we hope Blackwood gets distracted by something else, and men like him don't get distracted. She thought about that. The hired men. The ones in Greer's Crossing. Yes. How good are they? I don't know yet, Cole said. But 2 days ago I did something that should have gotten me killed immediately, and it didn't, because 4 men with guns stood aside. He looked at her. People's willingness to follow Blackwood's orders is not as absolute as it appears. Evelyn didn't say anything for a long moment. She was looking at a point somewhere past his shoulder, her expression doing the complex work of someone who had spent 18 months calculating risks out of pure survival necessity and was now being asked to calculate something different, not just how to survive, but whether something better than survival was possible. I need to know one thing, she said. What? Why are you doing this? She met his eyes. Not the version you've told yourself. The real reason. It was a fair question. He gave it the time it deserved. Because I walked through a door, he said, and you looked at me from the floor, and you didn't ask me for help. You didn't beg. You just looked. And I thought about what kind of man walks back out of that door. He paused. I'm not that kind. She held his gaze. That's a costly thing to not be. I know. And you're all right with that. I'm not sure all right is the right word, he said, but I'm not walking back out. The days settled into a rhythm that Evelyn recognized as the particular rhythm of 2 people learning to share space without abrasion, which was not as simple as it sounded when both people were accustomed to managing entirely on their own. Cole was a morning person by constitution, up before light, moving before he was fully awake, apparently able to function on 3 hours of sleep without visible consequence. Evelyn was not a morning person, but her body's damage was waking her at odd hours anyway, so the distinction mattered less than it might have. They developed a loose arrangement without discussing it. Cole handled the perimeter checks and the heavier outside work. Evelyn managed the food, the medical supplies, and the cabin's internal organization, and both of them did whatever else was immediately necessary without waiting to be asked. It was functional. More functional than she'd expected, given that she'd known him for less than a week. The tension came on the 4th day, as tensions between 2 honest people usually do, not from concealment, but from clarity. Cole had been checking the Southern Trail and come back with a report of boot prints he didn't recognize, too far off for immediate concern, but close enough to change the timeline of their situation. He told her what he'd found and what it meant, plainly and without softening it. We've got maybe 3 days before someone comes through that trail who's looking, he said. Maybe less. Then we need to decide, she said. Yes. She stood at the window. Outside, the mountain was doing its ordinary afternoon business, light moving through pines, some kind of hawk tracing a slow pattern above the eastern ridge, the creek audible but invisible. It was, she thought, a genuinely beautiful place. She hadn't let herself think that until now, because it had felt beside the point. If I leave, she said, what happens to you? I deal with it, he said. That's not an answer. It's the most honest one I've got, he said. I don't know exactly what happens to me, probably bad things for a while. Then I figure out what's next. And if I stay? Then we deal with it together, he said, which has better odds in my assessment for practical reasons. Practical reasons, she said. There was something dry in her voice that she hadn't intended and then decided not to take back. And other reasons, he said after a pause, that I'm not going to list out right now because you're standing there calculating escape routes in your head, and I don't want to add to what you're already carrying. She turned from the window to look at him. He was standing across the room with his arms at his sides, and his face had the quality she was coming to recognize as his version of disclosure. No particular expression, just the absence of his usual neutral composure, which for him amounted to the same thing. I'm not going, she said. He waited. I was never going to go, she said. I've known that since the first morning, but I needed to hear what you'd say when you thought I might. Something shifted in his face. Not relief exactly, more like something settling into place. You're more complicated than you look, he said. You're less complicated than you look, she said, which is its own kind of unusual. He almost smiled. She was getting better at seeing them, the ones that almost made it to his face. This one was close, Outside, the hawk had abandoned its circle and gone east, and the light through the pines was doing the gold-orange thing that meant another hour until dark. Cole moved to the fireplace to start the evening fire, and Evelyn came to help without being asked, and they worked beside each other in the limited space without collision, which was not nothing, between two people still figuring out the borders of each other. "Tell me about Webb," she said. "What he'd actually need to move against Blackwood." Cole thought about it as he worked. "Evidence," he said. "Specific documented evidence of specific crimes, not rumors, not testimony from people Blackwood can discredit." He paused. "Which means we need to think about what we know between us, what we can actually prove." Evelyn went still. Cole looked at her. "What?" he said. "I took something," she said slowly, like she was pulling the thought up from somewhere she'd buried it under the weight of the past few days. "The morning before everything, I'd been keeping the books for Blackwood for 6 months. He had me do the household ledgers and then the ranch accounts. And then 3 months ago, he started having me copy documents, land transfer records, county assessor filings." She met Cole's eyes. "I made copies. I kept them. I didn't know why at the time. Instinct, maybe. They're in my room at the ranch house, hidden. The fire was going, but neither of them was looking at it." "Hidden where?" Cole said. "Loose board under the washstand," she said. "Northeast corner of the room." Cole sat down. He didn't say anything for a moment, turning this new information over in his mind with the methodical attention he brought to most problems. "Evelyn," he said, "do you know what those documents are?" "I think so," she said. "I think they're proof that Gideon Blackwood has been filing fraudulent land claims for at least 4 years, claiming parcels under false names, consolidating ownership in ways the county never formally approved." She paused. "There are names in those documents, real landholders who lost their property through transactions that shouldn't have been legal." She looked at him steadily. "People who might have standing to challenge him. If someone could get those documents out." The fire crackled. Outside, the light finished its transition into dark. Cole Donovan sat in the cabin his younger self had built in a different life, thinking about a loose board under a washstand in a house belonging to a man who currently wanted him dead, and about whether the distance between here and there was survivable. "We're going to need help," he said. "Yes," Evelyn said, "and we're going to need a plan that isn't just optimistic." "I know," she said. "I've got an idea," he said. "It's not a good one." "Tell me anyway," she said. He did. Cole's plan, as he laid it out that evening, had the particular quality of plans formed by practical men under pressure. It was not elegant. It contained at least 2 points where everything could go catastrophically wrong, and it was probably the best available option anyway. The core of it was simple. Someone needed to get into the Blackwood ranch house and retrieve those documents from under the washstand. That someone could not be Evelyn, because Evelyn was the primary target of a $50 bounty, and could not walk onto that property without being immediately recognized and detained. It could not be Cole, because Cole had knocked the most powerful man in the territory unconscious in his own kitchen, and was the secondary target of the same bounty, and because Blackwood's men would be watching for exactly that kind of direct approach. It needed to be someone with a legitimate reason to be at the ranch, someone who had access to the interior of the house without raising suspicion, someone who knew how to keep their face neutral under pressure. "Doc Aldridge," Evelyn said. "He makes house calls to the ranch," Cole said. "Has for years. 2 of Blackwood's senior hands have chronic conditions he treats regularly." He paused. "I won't ask him. It's too dangerous, and he's already done more than I had any right to ask." "Then who?" Cole turned his coffee cup in his hands. "Martha Greer. She does the ranch's laundry, has a contract with Blackwood going back 8 years, goes in every Tuesday with her wagon." Evelyn thought about this. She had a clear memory of Martha Greer, a wide, solid woman in her 50s who had come and gone from the ranch without apparent emotional investment in any of its inhabitants, doing her work with the focused disinterest of someone who had long ago decided that the less she knew about her clients, the better her sleep. She had seemed to Evelyn like someone who had survived a great deal by the strategic application of not caring. "She won't want to do it," Evelyn said. "Probably not," Cole agreed. "But she had a brother, Eli Greer. Blackwood bought his land 4 years ago for a price that should have been a third higher, using some kind of option clause that nobody could quite explain." He looked at Evelyn. "Is that name in your documents?" She thought back. The documents were precise in her memory. She had a specific kind of recall for written things, numbers and names sticking in her mind the way physical objects didn't. Elias Greer, 40 acres, river access. Transfer dated March, 4 years ago. The option clause references a debt that I could not find the original record of anywhere in Blackwood's books. Because it was fabricated, Cole said. Almost certainly. He nodded, slowly. Then Martha Greer has a reason to care. Whether she'll act on it is a different question. He was quiet for a moment. I know where she lives, about 4 miles south, down the main valley road. I could reach her without going through Greer's crossing. At night, Evelyn said, without being seen. Yes. She looked at him. And if the hired men are already on the south trail, then I'll deal with that, he said. That is a deeply unsatisfying answer. I know, he said, but I don't have a better one. They argued about it for a while, not bitterly but seriously, the way two people argue when both of them are right about different parts of the same problem. Evelyn's position was that the risk was too high for a single point of contact who might simply refuse and then report them out of self-preservation. Cole's position was that without those documents, everything else they might attempt was a structure built on air. She knew he was correct. He knew she was correct. Eventually, they arrived at the conclusion that being correct about the difficulty of a situation did not exempt you from the necessity of acting inside it. I'll go tonight, Cole said. You stay in the cabin, door latched, rifle within reach. I know how a rifle works, she said. I know you do, he said, and said it in a way that was not condescending, just acknowledging. I should be back before dawn. And if you're not? He looked at her steadily. Give me until midday. Then go north along the ridge, not south. There's a settlement called Harlan's Fork about 8 miles up. It's small, but it's not Blackwood country. Ask for a woman named Ruth Casper. Tell her Cole Donovan sent you. She'll help. Evelyn memorized this the same way she'd memorized the documents, precisely and without visible effort. All right, she said. He went out an hour after dark. The south trail was empty, which told Cole one of two things. Either the hired men had moved on, or they were somewhere he couldn't see. In mountain terrain at night, the second possibility deserved more weight than the first. So he moved with the kind of careful, deliberate quiet he'd learned from years of tracking animals in country where the sounds you didn't make mattered as much as the ones you did. He took the long way around the ridge, adding 40 minutes to avoid the section of trail he'd seen the boot prints on. The night was clear, too clear in some ways, a nearly full moon throwing shadows that were sharp and easy to misjudge. But it also meant he could see the trail ahead of him, which was a reasonable trade. Martha Greer's house was a low, solid structure at the edge of a hayfield, the kind of building that had been repaired so many times over so many years that it had become its own accidental record of the people who'd lived in it. There was a light in the east window. Cole stopped in the tree line and watched it for 5 minutes. No movement that suggested anything other than a woman up late, which was not uncommon among people who worked hard by day and found the night the only time their thoughts had room to move. He crossed the field and knocked on the door, 3 times, measured, not urgent. The light moved. He heard footsteps. Then her voice, flat and careful. Who's there? Cole Donovan, he said. I apologize for the hour. A long pause. The sound of something being moved, a bar, probably. Then the door opened 6 inches, and Martha Greer's face appeared in the gap, illuminated from behind by the lamp she was holding. She was a large woman with gray-streaked hair and the particular expression of someone who had been expecting trouble to arrive eventually and was mildly irritated that it had chosen this specific evening. You, she said. Me, he agreed. There are men in this valley looking for you. I know. She studied him for a moment with the thoroughness of a woman accustomed to making quick, accurate assessments of difficult situations. Come in, she said, and stood back. The interior of her house was orderly in the way that working people's homes are. Not decorated, just organized. Everything in its place because everything had a purpose, and the place was how you found it when you needed it. She set the lamp on the table, put a kettle on without asking, and sat down across from him with her hands flat on the table, which Cole recognized as the posture of someone who had decided to listen but had not yet decided to agree. He told her all of it. He didn't try to soften any part, and he didn't try to make it more dramatic than it was. He laid it out the way he'd laid out the plan to Evelyn, plainly, with the uncertain parts acknowledged as uncertain. When he was done, Martha was quiet for a long time. "Eli's land," she said finally. "His name is in the documents," Cole said. "Evelyn Mercer copied those records herself. She has a specific memory for written things, she's certain." Martha looked at the wall. Her face was doing something complicated and mostly interior. "He never believed it was legal," she said. "He tried to get a lawyer from Cheyenne to look at the option clause. Lawyer said it would cost more to fight than the land was worth." She paused. "The land was worth a great deal more than Eli got for it. It had river access. He'd have been set." She looked back at Cole. "Instead, he's working someone else's cattle for wages." Cole waited. "What exactly do you need me to do?" she said. He told her. When he finished, she poured 2 cups of coffee. The kettle had boiled at some point during the conversation without either of them noticing, and pushed one across to him and sat with hers in both hands, thinking. "The room is on the northeast corner," she said. "Washstand, loose board underneath." "That's what Evelyn said." "I've been in that room," Martha said. "I do the betting. I know where the washstand is." She drank her coffee. "Tuesday is 2 days away." "I know," Cole said. "Can you move it up?" She looked at him. "I have a standing arrangement. If I show up on a day that isn't my day, it's unusual." "Would Blackwood's people turn you away?" "No," she said. "I've been going there 8 years. They'd let me in." She paused. "But they'd remember it." "After those documents are out of that room," Cole said, "Blackwood is going to have larger problems to worry about than unusual laundry schedules." Martha Greer considered this for a moment with the gravity it deserved. Then she set down her cup. "Tomorrow morning," she said. "I'll go at my usual time with the wagon. I'll say I had a scheduling conflict with another client and needed to shift the day." She looked at Cole with an expression that was not quite hard and not quite soft, somewhere in the middle, where most honest things live. "If they search the wagon, put the documents under the laundry. If they search that carefully, we have bigger problems than a Tuesday visit. And when I have them, bring them to Doc Aldridge," Cole said. "Tell him I sent you. He'll know what to do with them." He reached the cabin an hour before dawn. The door was latched from the inside as he'd asked. He knocked twice, then once more, the pattern they'd agreed on, and heard Evelyn's footsteps crossing the floor with the quickness of someone who had not been asleep. She opened the door and looked at him in the gray pre-dawn light, reading his face before he said a word. "She'll do it," Evelyn said. "Yes," he said. She stepped back to let him in. The fire was burning. She'd kept it up through the night, and there was coffee on, which told him she'd made a calculation about when he'd return and had timed it accordingly. He sat down and she handed him the cup, and he drank it without speaking for a moment. "Eli Greer's name was in the documents," he said. "I thought it might be relevant," she said. "It was." She sat across from him. She'd been awake all night, that much was clear. Not distressed about it, just awake, which was consistent with everything he'd learned about her in the past 5 days. She had the ability to inhabit difficult waiting without being consumed by it. He found that more remarkable the more he observed it. "The hired men," she said. "Did you see them?" "No, South Trail was empty." "That means they're somewhere else." "Yes," he said, "which is not comforting." She nodded. They sat with that knowledge for a moment. 2 people who had gotten fairly good at sitting with uncomfortable knowledge without making it worse by talking it to death. "Cole," she said. He looked at her. "When this is over..." She stopped, started again. "If this works, if the documents are what I think they are, and Aldridge can get them to the right people, and Blackwood actually faces consequences for what he's done." She was looking at her hands. "What happens to your land?" He thought about that honestly. "Depends on whether Blackwood's property claims get unwound," he said. "If the territorial attorney finds fraud in the land records, there may be a review of adjacent properties. Mine was bought clean, but the northern boundary dispute, the one I came to settle, the day I walked through his door, that might get revisited." He paused. "Best case, I get my land back and the boundary is decided properly. Worst case, the whole thing ends up in territorial court for 2 years and costs me everything I have in legal fees." "Neither of those is a good answer," she said. "No," he agreed, "but they're the honest ones." She looked up. "I have money," she said. Not much. I was saving it. Had it with me when I left, in a pouch in my coat. It's not enough for a lawyer, but it's something. He looked at her for a moment. Evelyn, I know what you're going to say, she said, that you didn't help me for repayment, and I shouldn't offer it that way. Her voice was level. That's not what I'm doing. I'm saying that whatever comes next, it doesn't have to all be on you. She held his gaze. I'm not a guest. I'm not a charity case you're maintaining until it's safe to send me away. I'm someone who made a choice to stay, and I want to be in this the same way you are. The fire shifted. Outside, the first birds were starting, that tentative preliminary sound before the full morning chorus. Cole looked at her for a long moment. Whatever he'd been prepared to say, he didn't say it. Instead, all right, he said, equal footing. Equal footing, she said. It was not a dramatic moment. Neither of them made it one. But something settled between them in the saying of it, something that had been slightly unresolved, and they both felt it, and neither of them mentioned that they felt it, which was probably the right instinct. The trouble they'd been managing to avoid caught up with them that afternoon. Cole was splitting wood behind the cabin, a task that was partly practical and partly the kind of physical work that helped him think. When he heard Patchy make a sound she only made when she smelled something that wasn't part of her normal environment. Not quite alarm, not quite curiosity. Somewhere between. He set down the axe and walked around to the front of the cabin. The tree line was 30 yards away on the south side, the same direction where he'd found those unidentified boot prints 2 days ago. He stood and watched the tree line and waited. Nothing moved for 2 minutes. Then something did. A shift of shadow in the wrong direction for the wind. A sound that was almost a footstep, but not quite. He went inside. Evelyn looked up from the table, where she'd been working on something she'd found in the back of a kitchen drawer. A stub of pencil and some old paper, on which she'd been reconstructing the land document records from memory with the specific, methodical precision of someone who understood their value. She read his face immediately. How many? She said. I don't know, he said. I'm not sure yet. Could be one. Could be more. He took the Winchester from the corner and checked the load. Go to the back room. The window faces north. If I tell you to run, you go through that window and north along the ridge. Don't wait. Don't argue. I'm not running and leaving you here alone. Evelyn, no. She stood up, folding the paper carefully and putting it in her coat pocket. What do you need me to do? He looked at her. He could see from her face that this particular argument was not available to him, so he didn't spend time on it. The back window, he said. Not to go through, to watch. Tell me if anyone comes around the north side of the cabin. She went. He took a position inside the front door, not behind it, slightly to the side, because a door doesn't stop a bullet, and people always aim for the center. He waited. The waiting lasted 4 minutes, which was long enough to make him wonder if Patchy had been wrong, and then the knock came. Twice, measured, from someone who wanted to announce themselves and give Cole the chance to answer rather than react. He processed this. Armed men sent to capture or kill you don't knock. They breach. This was something else. Who's there? He said through the door. Horace Webb. A pause. I've got information you need. Cole opened the door. The man on the other side was 50-something, barrel-chested, with a gray beard and the weathered look of someone who had spent 30 years in weather. He was alone, which didn't mean he'd come alone, but it was a reasonable opening position. I was holding his hat in both hands, which was either politeness or a way of showing he wasn't reaching for anything. Mr. Webb, Cole said. Donovan. Webb looked past him into the cabin with the directness of a man used to taking inventory. Is the Mercer woman here? She's all right? She's here, Cole said. Evelyn had appeared in the interior doorway. She looked at Webb with the careful assessment of someone who had learned to read people's intentions quickly. Horace, she said. Miss Mercer. He turned his hat in his hands. I've ridden 3 hours to get here. Doc Aldridge told me where you were. Don't be angry at him. I gave him no option. Come in, Cole said. They sat, all three of them at the small table, and Webb talked. He talked with the urgency of a man who has been sitting on information for a while and has finally found the right place to put it. He'd been contacted by 5 other men in the territory, all of them with grievances against Blackwood that were specific and documented: boundary fraud, debt manipulation, water right suppression. One of them was a county assessor's clerk who had been approached by Blackwood 3 years ago to alter land records, and had declined and had kept, out of some combination of principle and self-preservation, a written record of the approach. That's 6 people, Cole said, including you. 7, Webb said. There's a woman in Black Ridge, Rosa Whitman, runs the boarding house. Blackwood tried to buy her property 2 years ago at a fraction of its value. He had the fire inspector declare it a hazard and shut it down for 6 months. She's been waiting for someone to start a fire worth joining. Evelyn was listening to all of this with her hands flat on the table, and Cole could see her turning it over, calculating, the way she calculated everything. 7 people with grievances isn't enough, she said, not against Blackwood's money and his connections. 7 people with documented evidence is different from 7 people with complaints, Webb said. He looked at her steadily. The territorial attorney in Cheyenne, man named Hargrove, he's been wanting a case against Blackwood for 2 years. He just hasn't had anyone willing to stand up and be a named complainant. He paused. If we have the land records you copied, and we have the clerk's testimony about the record alteration, and we have 6 additional complainants with their own documentation, it becomes a case instead of a problem, Cole said. Yes, Webb said. But there's a clock. He set his hat on the table, the first time since he'd arrived. Blackwood knows something is moving. He doesn't know exactly what, but he has enough information to know his situation is not stable. My source at the ranch, one of his senior hands who has been looking for a reason to leave, says Blackwood spent yesterday evening burning papers. The room went quiet. Which papers? Evelyn said. He doesn't know exactly, Webb said, but anything in the main office that he thought could be used against him. He looked at Evelyn directly. If those documents in the northeast room were connected to the main office records, if the originals are gone, the copies I made are the only record, Evelyn said. Then we need them out of that room today, Cole said. Not tomorrow. Today. Martha Greer went this morning, Webb said. I passed her wagon on the road coming up. She'd already been. Cole and Evelyn looked at each other. You passed her going which direction? Cole said. North, Webb said, toward Aldridge's place. Cole sat back and let out a long breath. The timing was closer than he'd wanted it to be and better than he'd feared. There's something else, Webb said. His voice had shifted, gone quieter, which among men of his type usually meant the most important information was still arriving. The 2 hired men, the ones from Greer's Crossing. What about them? Cole said. They found this place, Webb said. Or they will by tonight. I crossed their trail 2 miles south. They were reading the ground, following something, moving carefully. He looked at Cole. They're good. Better than I expected for the money Blackwood was paying. How long? Cole said. 6 hours, Webb said. Maybe 5. Cole stood up. I wasn't panicking. Panic was a waste of 5 hours. But the calculation in his head had just shifted completely, and everything he'd been thinking about the timeline was now different. All right, he said. Here's what changes. He laid it out, not asking Webb, telling him, because there wasn't time for democratic process. Webb had come here with information, and Webb was on their side, which meant Webb was now inside the plan whether he'd intended to be. Cole gave him the specifics. Webb would ride back down to Aldridge's, confirm Martha had delivered the documents, and then carry word to the other complainants that they needed to move. Now, not in a week, but in the next 24 hours. Cheyenne was 2 days' hard ride. Hargrove at the territorial attorney's office needed to have those documents and complainant names in his hands before Blackwood could make any of the evidence or the witnesses disappear. And you? Webb said. We stay here, Cole said. Webb looked at him, then at Evelyn, then back at Cole. With 2 professional trackers heading this direction. Yes, Cole said. I know what it is, Cole said. But if we run now, we pull attention toward Aldridge, toward you, toward everyone carrying the evidence south. If we stay here, the hired men find what they came to find and stop looking in other directions. He said it flatly, without making it sound like heroism, because it wasn't. It was just arithmetic. The cabin has 3 approaches. I know all of them. They don't know this terrain the way I do. Webb was quiet for a long moment. He was not a cowardly man, but he was a practical one, and Cole could see him working through the logic and arriving at the same unpleasant conclusion Cole had already arrived at. I'll ride fast, Webb said. I know you will, Cole said. And Webb, take the east trail down, not the south. There's a creek crossing 2 miles down that's confusing in the dark. Anyone following you from the south won't know it. Webb stood, picked up his hat, and looked at Evelyn. Miss Mercer, he said, I want you to know what you did. Keeping those records. That took something. Evelyn looked at him steadily. Get them to Cheyenne, she said. That's all I need. He left. They heard his horse moving east through the trees, and then the sound faded. And then there was just the cabin and the mountain and the 5 or 6 hours they had before 2 professional manhunters walked through the southern tree line. Evelyn unfolded the paper from her coat pocket and put it back on the table. I'm going to finish this, she said. Every land parcel I can remember, every name, every date. If something happens to the documents Martha took, nothing will happen to them, Cole said. But if it does, she said, I want a second copy. He looked at her, at the absolute unwavering pragmatism of her, and said nothing, because there was nothing useful to say. He picked up his rifle and went to the window to watch the south tree line, and she sat at the table with the pencil stub and the old paper, and they worked in their separate and parallel ways because that was what the moment required. Outside, the afternoon light was shifting west, and somewhere down the mountain, 2 men were reading the ground and following a trail that led here. And in Cheyenne, a man named Hargrove sat in an office that held the difference between justice and whatever passed for it in a territory where the wrong man had held too much power for too long. Cole watched the tree line. Evelyn wrote, The fire burned low, and neither of them moved to add to it, because some things could wait and some things could not, and right now the window and the paper were the things that could not. The first hour after Webb left was the quietest. Cole used it well. He walked the perimeter of the cabin twice, not the casual check he'd been doing every morning, but a serious assessment, the kind where you look at the ground and the trees and the angles of approach and ask yourself, if I were coming to take this place, where would I come from and what would I do? He had an advantage the hired men didn't have, which was that he'd built this cabin himself and knew every piece of it, where the walls were thickest, where the single window on the east side gave a narrow line of sight down the ravine, where the ground dipped behind the woodpile in a way that would read as solid cover, but wasn't. He came back inside and told Evelyn what he'd worked out. South approach is the obvious one, he said. They'll come that way first, but they're professionals. They won't commit to it fully until they know what they're walking into. There's a second approach from the east, through the ravine, slower, harder going, but it flanks the front door. So 2 directions at once, she said. Potentially, he said. If there are 2 of them working as a team, that's the smart play. One draws attention at the front, one comes through the ravine. He looked at the east window, which means the east window matters more than the front door. Evelyn looked at the window, small, set high in the wall, the kind a man would have to come through awkwardly. What do you want me to do? Can you shoot? He said. My father taught me, she said. I'm not fast and I'm not precise past 30 yards. But inside this cabin, 30 yards doesn't apply. No, he said. It doesn't. He got the pistol from his saddlebag, a Colt that he privately considered unreliable past 20 feet, but was adequate for close quarters, and set it on the table beside her. East window. If anyone comes through it who isn't me, you don't wait. She picked up the pistol, checked the cylinder the way someone does when they've handled firearms before and have their own relationship with them, and set it down again. All right, she said. I mean it, he said. Don't hesitate. I heard you the first time, she said. Not sharp, just definite. She went back to writing. He watched her for a moment. She was on her 3rd page now, the pencil stub moving steadily, and he thought about what it took to sit and reconstruct legal documents from memory while anticipating a violent confrontation within the next few hours. He didn't have a word for what that quality was. Fortitude was close, but too formal. Stubbornness was more accurate, but didn't capture the intelligence in it. He went back to the window. They came at dusk, which was exactly when Cole would have come. The light was at its most unreliable, too dark for clarity, too light for shadows to be absolute. And the sounds of the mountain were shifting from day sounds to night sounds in a way that covered movement well. He saw the first one from the south, not because the man made a mistake, but because Cole had been watching that exact stretch of tree line for 3 hours and knew what it looked like at rest, and could therefore perceive what it looked like when it wasn't. A shape that held still while everything else moved slightly in the wind. East, Cole said quietly to Evelyn. She moved to her position without a word. Cole went to the front door and eased it open 3 inches, enough to see the south approach, not enough to be an obvious target, and waited. The shape in the tree line didn't move for 2 full minutes, which meant the man was patient and careful and was probably waiting for a signal from the second position. Cole thought about his options. He had a Winchester, a cabin with solid walls, and knowledge of the terrain. The hired men had patience, professional experience, and the advantage of choosing when to move. Waiting inside and letting them set the terms was not, in his assessment, the winning approach. Blackwood's men would expect a defensive posture. They'd worked out how to defeat a defensive posture. He did something they probably hadn't planned for. He opened the front door fully and walked out. He walked with his rifle at his side, not raised, not threatening, just present, and he walked toward the tree line at the same steady pace he used to cross his own yard. And he said, loudly enough to carry, "I know where both of you are. I've known for 2 hours. We should talk before anyone makes a mistake they can't take back." Nothing happened for a long moment. Then a voice came from the tree line, south, where he'd expected. "Set the rifle down, Donovan." "I don't think I'll do that," Cole said, "but I'll stop walking." He stopped. He was 20 feet from the tree line, which was an uncomfortable distance in multiple directions, and he was aware of it. "Gideon Blackwood wants the woman," the voice said, "and he wants you returned to face charges. You come in quiet, nobody gets hurt. We've got no interest in making this worse than it has to be." "What charges?" Cole said. A pause. "Assault. Theft of property." "She's not property," Cole said. "And the man I hit was standing over a bleeding woman with his fist in the air. Any jury in the territory would call that justified, and you know it." He kept his voice level. "Here's what I know about your situation. Gideon Blackwood sent you up here to clean up a problem before it becomes a bigger problem. The bigger problem is that there are documents, land fraud records, that left this mountain hours ago and are currently on their way to the territorial attorney's office in Cheyenne. Blackwood doesn't know that yet. When he finds out, your employment arrangement with him is going to become significantly less valuable." Silence. "So you've got a choice," Cole said. "You can take us in tonight and collect whatever he's paying you, and then watch him go down for fraud and have whatever he promised you turn to smoke. Or you can walk away from this job, tell him you lost the trail, and be somewhere else when the territorial law arrives." He paused. "I'm not trying to threaten you. I'm giving you information. What you do with it is up to you." The tree line was absolutely still. Then the voice said, "You're bluffing." "Maybe," Cole said. "You could find out by taking us in. But if I'm not bluffing, you'll spend the next 2 years explaining to a territorial court why you were working for a man convicted of systematic land fraud." He let that sit for a moment. "For $50. Another silence, longer this time. Cole stood in the cooling dusk air and waited, because waiting was the only thing left to do. Either the argument landed or it didn't, and if it didn't, he was 20 feet from cover, and the next few minutes were going to be very bad. The shadow in the tree line moved. Then it moved again, in the direction away from the cabin, and didn't stop. 15 seconds later, the sound of movement to the east. The second man, who had gotten as far as the ravine approach, stopped and also began moving away. Cole stood where he was until he could no longer hear either of them. Then he went back inside. Evelyn was standing at the east window, pistol in hand, looking at him. "That worked," she said. It was not quite a question. "This time," he said. He was aware that his hands were not entirely steady, which he considered a reasonable response to the last 10 minutes. They're professionals. Professionals make cost-benefit calculations. The math changed. What if they go back to Blackwood and tell him about the documents? Then he knows earlier than he would have otherwise, Cole said. But if the documents are already at Aldridge's and Webb is already riding south, there's nothing Blackwood can do with earlier knowledge except panic faster. He set the rifle against the wall. Panicking men make bad decisions. That's useful. She put the pistol down on the table. She looked at him for a long moment with an expression he was starting to be able to read. Not quite relief, because she didn't reach for relief easily, but something adjacent to it. The face of someone who had been prepared for a worse outcome and was calibrating to a better one. "You're not as cautious as you appear," she said. "I'm cautious," he said. "I just calculate different things." Walking out the front door at 2 armed men is not generally considered cautious. "No," he agreed, "but staying inside was worse." He went to the fireplace and added wood, because the evening was cold and his hands needed something to do. Sometimes the unexpected thing is the safer thing. They came prepared for someone defending a position. They weren't prepared for a conversation. Evelyn sat down slowly. Her ribs had been better today. She'd been moving with less visible effort, but the tension of the past few hours had tightened everything back up. He could see it in the set of her shoulders. "Rest," he said. "Tomorrow is going to be complicated." "Define complicated," she said. "Webb will have reached Aldridge by now. The documents are moving south. Within 2 days, Blackwood will know something is wrong, either from his hired men or from his own sources. When he knows, he'll try to act." He looked at the fire. "That's when it gets complicated." She looked at the paper on the table, her reconstructed records, 3 pages of careful handwriting. She folded them and put them back in her coat pocket. "The senior hand," she said. "The one Webb mentioned, the one watching Blackwood. Do you know who it is?" "No," Cole said. "Webb protected that." "Smart," she said. "But it means we don't know what Blackwood knows or when he'll know it." She paused. "He's not a stupid man. I want to be clear about that. He's ruthless and he's corrupt and he's capable of violence, but he's not stupid. He built that empire through a combination of real work and systematic predation, and he's maintained it for 20 years by understanding people's breaking points." She looked at Cole. "He'll see this coming before most men would." "I know," Cole said, "which means he's already thinking about how to respond." "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. "He'll try to disappear the witnesses," she said. "Not physically. He's not that crude when he has alternatives. He'll try to discredit them. Buy them off. Find something on each of them he can use." She turned this over in her mind. "Rosa Whitman at the boarding house. Is there anything Blackwood could use against her?" Cole thought. "She's a widow. Runs the boarding house alone. I don't know her story well enough." "I do," Evelyn said. "She came from Missouri about 8 years ago. There was something about a first husband. She never talked about it directly, but there was talk." She looked at the wall. "If Blackwood has someone who can find Missouri court records, we need to warn her," Cole said. "We need to warn all of them," Evelyn said. "Webb needs to tell every person on that list. Whatever Blackwood might know about you, Hargrove's office needs to hear it from you first, before Blackwood can use it to discredit the testimony." She looked at Cole. "Do you think Webb thought of that?" "I think Webb is a smart man," Cole said. "But he's been carrying this alone for a while. He might not have thought of all of it. Is there a way to get word to him?" Cole thought about it. "Aldridge," he said. "If we can get to Aldridge's place, he might be able to reach Webb before Webb leaves for Cheyenne. Can we get to Aldridge's place without being seen?" He looked at the dark window. "At night," he said. "Through the North Ridge. It's a longer way, but it avoids the main valley roads." Evelyn stood up. "Then we go tonight." "Your ribs?" "My ribs are not the most important thing right now," she said. She said it without drama, just as a statement of priority. "How long is the ride?" 3 hours, maybe a little more." "Then we should leave now," she said. They rode through the dark on Patchy, who managed 2 people on uncertain mountain terrain with the resigned competence of a horse that had been asked to do difficult things before and had learned that protest was inefficient. Cole kept them to the high trails where the ground was harder and held hoofprints less clearly, moving at a pace that was faster than careful but not quite fast enough to be reckless. Evelyn rode in front this time, which had been her idea. She'd pointed out that she could watch the trail ahead while he watched the back, and that the arrangement made practical sense, and Cole had agreed because it did. What neither of them mentioned was that riding this way meant she was pressed against him for 3 hours in the cold, and that he was aware of this in a way that was quietly difficult to be purely practical about. He focused on the trail. She asked him, about an hour in, to tell her more about Hargrove, the territorial attorney. "I've never met him," Cole said. "Aldridge knew him, said he was a man who wanted to do the work right and hadn't always had the material to do it." He thought for a moment. "In this territory, the law is only as useful as the people willing to use it. Hargrove can't bring a case on rumor and general dislike. He needs witnesses who will stand up in open court and name specific crimes with specific evidence." "And if our witnesses lose their nerve," Evelyn said. "Then it falls apart," Cole said, "which is why Blackwood will work very hard to make that happen." "He'll come after you," she said. "Yes." Specifically you, she said, because you're the one who hit him. Because that's personal in a way the land fraud isn't. She paused. He'll want you discredited before you can testify, or removed. I know, Cole said. That doesn't worry you. It worries me, he said. It just doesn't change what needs to be done. She was quiet for a while after that. The mountain moved around them, dark and enormous and indifferent, and Cole guided Patchy through a narrow section between two rock faces that he knew by feel as much as by sight, and came out on the other side into a broader trail that ran along the top of the North Ridge with a view that, in daylight, was the best in the territory. Cole, she said. Yes. When I was in that room, she said. The locked room, after he hit me. I sat on the floor and I thought about what my options were, and I had this clear, very specific thought, which was, I have made a terrible miscalculation by staying as long as I did. He didn't say anything. He let her keep going. I told myself I was staying because I had nowhere to go, because leaving without money and without a plan was dangerous. She paused. But the truth was simpler than that. I'd gotten used to it. Not comfortable. I was never comfortable, but used to it. And getting used to something that's hurting you is the most dangerous thing there is because it feels like adaptation. You left, he said. You carried me out, she said. You said no, he said. Before I came through that door, you said no to him. That's not nothing. That's everything, actually. She was quiet for a moment. It cost me a great deal. Yes, he said. But you said it anyway. The trail widened and Patchy picked up her pace slightly, sensing, the way horses do, that a destination was nearing. I don't know what I'm going to do, Evelyn said. After. When it's over. She said it not as helplessness, but as an honest statement of an unresolved question. I've been so focused on the immediate problem that I haven't thought past it. You don't have to think past it tonight, Cole said. I know, she said, but I want to. I want there to be an after that I'm moving toward, not just a now that I'm surviving. She paused. Does that make sense? Yes, he said. It made a great deal of sense. He'd spent 4 years building a ranch on exactly that principle. The idea that the work you did today was in service of something specific you were building toward, not just labor for its own sake. The garden, he said. She turned her head slightly. What? You said you wanted a garden, real one. Tomatoes, peppers, maybe some fruit trees. He paused. My land, if it comes back, has a south-facing slope about 100 yards from the house. Good soil. Gets morning light all the way through to afternoon. He said it carefully, like someone putting something fragile on a table. Not pressing, just placing. Enough space for whatever you wanted to grow. She was quiet for long enough that he wondered if he'd misjudged the moment entirely. That would depend, she said finally, on where I was living. Yes, he said. It would. Another silence, but a different quality of silence than before, the kind that has something growing in it rather than something absent. Let's get through tomorrow first, she said. Yes, he said. Let's do that. Aldridge's light was burning when they came down off the North Ridge, which was either good fortune or a sign that something was happening inside that house that had kept him up past his usual hour. Cole tied Patchy at the fence and they went to the door, and Aldridge opened it before Cole knocked. He'd heard them coming, apparently, and his face, when he saw them, was the face of a man who was relieved and also already moving to the next problem. Come in, he said. Martha delivered the documents. I have them. Good, Cole said. Is Webb still here? Left an hour ago, Aldridge said. Headed south. He looked at Evelyn with the professional attention of a man checking on a patient. Ribs? Manageable, she said. You've been riding for 3 hours. I have, she said. They're managing. He didn't look convinced, but he moved on because Cole's expression told him there was something more urgent than ribs. Webb needs to know, Evelyn said, and laid it out. The witness preparation, the preemptive disclosure, making sure each person told Hargrove's office their own vulnerabilities before Blackwood could weaponize them. Aldridge listened with his full attention, his hands wrapped around a cup he'd apparently been holding when they arrived. I can send a rider after Webb, he said when she finished. Young man in the settlement south of here, he rides faster than anyone in this valley. I've used him before for medical emergencies. He looked at Evelyn. You thought of this. She did, Cole said. Aldridge looked between them. He had the particular perception of someone who had spent 40 years observing people in the most unguarded moments of their lives, and whatever he was perceiving now, he kept carefully to himself. The documents, Cole said. Can I see them? Aldridge brought them from the back room, a leather folder, carefully wrapped. Cole took them to the table and opened them, and Evelyn came to stand beside him, and together they went through the contents page by page. She cross-referenced each document against her reconstruction from memory, checking her own accuracy, and found 3 small discrepancies where she'd remembered names slightly wrong and several places where the actual documents contained information she hadn't been able to reconstruct. Supporting records, attachment pages she hadn't seen when she was copying. This is more complete than I thought, she said. Is it enough? Cole asked. She thought carefully. The Elias Greer land transfer is here with the original option clause and the reference debt record, and I can now see clearly that the debt is cited against an account number that doesn't appear anywhere else in these books. It was invented. She turned to another section. There are 4 other transfers with similar structures. And here, she pointed, this is a water rights transfer that cites a county commission approval that I would wager never happened. Can you put that in writing? Aldridge said. Your analysis. What each document shows and why it demonstrates fraud. In plain language that a lawyer who isn't familiar with ranch accounting could follow. She looked at him. Yes, she said. I can do that. Tonight? She looked at Cole. Tonight, he said. We can't take the documents back up the mountain. They go south with your rider. But if Evelyn writes the analysis before they leave, Hargrove has the documents and the explanation of what he's looking at, Aldridge said. Not just a stack of papers he has to interpret himself. Yes, Evelyn said. Aldridge found paper and a proper pen. Not a stub, but a real one, with good ink. And Evelyn sat at his table and wrote. She wrote for 2 hours, steadily and without wasted motion. And what she produced was not a legal brief. She had no legal training. But it was something arguably more useful. A clear-eyed, specific account of every suspicious transaction in the documents, written by someone who had worked those books from the inside and understood exactly where the seams were and why they didn't hold. Cole sat across from her while she wrote. Aldridge moved through the house, doing the small tasks of a man keeping himself occupied. The fire burned. Outside, the Wyoming night did its work. When she was finished, she set the pen down and looked at what she'd written, and then at Cole. It's not perfect, she said. There are things I might have missed. It's more than anyone else could have written, Cole said. Aldridge's writer was a boy of about 17, tall, angular, with the serious face of someone who had been given responsibilities early. He arrived within 15 minutes of being sent for, took the leather folder and Evelyn's written analysis without question, accepted the route to intercept Webb at the southern settlement, and left at a speed that made Patchy look philosophical about her own capabilities. They watched him go. Now, Aldridge said, what happens at the ranch? Cole turned. What do you mean? I mean that Gideon Blackwood is sitting at that ranch right now, and within 48 hours he's going to learn that something is moving against him. Aldridge looked at Cole steadily. My source, the man on the inside that Webb told you about, came to me 2 days ago. He's been keeping accounts of his own, not land records, personal accounts, things he witnessed directly, conversations he was present for, orders he was given. The doctor paused. His name is Frank Abel. He's been Blackwood's foreman for 6 years, and he's been waiting for exactly this kind of moment. He's willing to testify, but he needs to know there's something real to testify for. He won't walk away from that job and into nothing. Cole looked at Evelyn. She was looking at Aldridge with the focused expression of someone processing rapidly. If Abel walks, she said slowly, Blackwood loses his operational control. The ranch is managed through Abel. He knows where everything is, how everything runs. Without him, Blackwood is trying to manage 40 hired hands and a massive operation by himself. She paused. And if Abel takes what he knows to Hargrove's office in person, he becomes the most valuable witness in the case, Cole said. He needs an escort, Aldridge said. Someone to ride south with him. Someone Blackwood's remaining men won't interfere with openly. He looked at Cole. This is the part where I tell you that this is not your responsibility and you don't have to do it. And then, Cole said, And then you do it anyway, Aldridge said. Cole was quiet for a moment. He looked at the fire, and then at Evelyn, and then at the folder-shaped space on the table where the documents had been, and he thought about the 40 acres on the North Ridge that might or might not still be his, and about 2 hired men walking away into the dark because the math had changed, and about a woman who had said no and meant it and was sitting 3 feet from him having just spent 2 hours writing the case that might finally make it count for something. "When does Abel move?" he said. "Dawn," Aldridge said. "If he gets word tonight." "Get him word," Cole said. "Tell him to meet us at the south gate of his property. Not the main road, the south gate, through the hayfield." He paused. "Tell him to bring whatever he has in writing. And tell him to walk casual, like a man going to check the herd. Nothing that reads like leaving." Aldridge nodded. He was already reaching for his coat. "I'm coming with you," Evelyn said to Cole. She said it in the tone that had become familiar, not asking, just stating. He looked at her. Her face was set, and he recognized the specific quality of her resolution, which was the kind that had nothing performative in it. She'd decided, and she was telling him. The only question was whether he was going to waste time on an argument he wasn't going to win. "All right," he said. "All right," she said. And so it was that in the pre-dawn dark of a Wyoming morning, Cole Donovan and Evelyn Mercer rode south toward the most dangerous piece of ground in the territory, not running from Gideon Blackwood's reach but moving directly into it, because that was where the last necessary thing was. And because neither of them was the kind of person who sent someone else to do the necessary thing while they waited somewhere safer. The mountain released them into the valley as the first gray showed in the east, and below them, 3 miles away, the lights of the Blackwood Ranch burned like something that didn't yet know it was already finished. Frank Abel was exactly where Aldridge's message said he would be. He was standing at the south gate when they came down through the hayfield in the gray pre-dawn, a solidly built man in his late 40s, with a face that had been weathered into something that looked like stone but moved like something considerably more complicated when he saw them coming. He had a saddlebag over one shoulder and his hat pulled low, and he was standing with the practiced stillness of a man who had spent 6 years learning to look like he wasn't waiting for anything. Cole pulled Patchy up and looked at him. "Abel." "Donovan." Abel looked at Evelyn. "Miss Mercer." Something moved across his face, not quite guilt, but in the neighborhood. "I'm sorry I didn't act sooner." "You're acting now," Evelyn said. She said it without absolution in it, but without accusation either, just the fact of it. The only useful thing left to say. Abel nodded once. He opened the saddlebag and showed them what was inside. A bound journal, densely written, and a separate sheaf of folded papers. 6 years, he said. Everything I witnessed directly. Dates, names, exact conversations where I could remember them. He paused. There's a section on the assault. What I heard from the house that morning. What the other hands told me afterward. He looked at Evelyn. It's not comfortable reading. It doesn't need to be comfortable, she said. It needs to be accurate. It's accurate, he said. I swear it. They had one horse between 3 of them, which was a problem with a straightforward solution. Abel had his own horse, a solid brown gelding tied in the trees 20 yards south. He'd thought ahead, which told Cole something useful about the man's actual capabilities. They rode south as the sky lightened, 3 people on 2 horses, moving with the quiet purposefulness of people who understood that every mile between them and that ranch reduced the available options for anyone who might want to stop them. Cole watched the road behind them. Evelyn watched the fields to either side. Abel rode with his jaw set and his eyes forward, like a man who had made a decision he wasn't going to revisit. After about a mile, he said, without preamble, he's going to run. Cole looked at him. When? When he finds out about the documents, Abel said. And he will find out, probably today. He has a contact at the postal station in Black Ridge who watches for anything addressed to Cheyenne. It won't tell him the specific contents, but it'll tell him that something is moving in that direction. He paused. When Blackwood understands the situation is beyond control, his instinct won't be to fight it. He'll cut losses. He has money in 2 banks outside the territory. I know that for certain. He'll take what he can liquidate quickly and go. How quickly? Evelyn said. Hours, Abel said. Not days. He's had a contingency since before I knew him. A man like that always does. He knows how to disappear. He's done it once before, somewhere else, before he came here. He looked at Cole. Whatever is happening in Cheyenne needs to happen fast enough to matter. Cole thought about Webb, riding hard through the night, about the rider Aldridge had sent to intercept him, about Hargrove sitting in his Cheyenne office, and whether a man who had been wanting a case for 2 years would move on it fast enough when it arrived. "There's nothing more we can do about the speed of that," Cole said. "We get you and your journal to Hargrove's office, and we let the law do what the law does." "And if he's gone before the law gets there?" Evelyn said. Cole was quiet for a moment. "Then we make sure he can't come back," he said. "A man convicted in absentia on documented fraud charges can't return to the territory without facing arrest. His property gets seized, his influence disappears. He becomes a fugitive instead of a rancher." He paused. "It's not the same as watching him face it directly, but it's not nothing." Evelyn looked at the road ahead. "It's not nothing," she said. She said it slowly, like she was deciding whether she believed it. Then, "All right, it's not nothing." They reached the main valley road as the sun came fully up, and the decision they faced was not a comfortable one. The valley road was faster. It would get them to Greer's Crossing, and from there to the stage south, in a fraction of the time the hill trails would take. But the valley road was also where Blackwood's men moved, where his contacts watched, where the 2 hired trackers had been seen asking questions 3 days ago. "Road," Evelyn said. Cole looked at her. "We've been hiding for a week," she said. "Hiding was the right thing when we needed to protect the documents and get them moving. They're moving. Abel has his journal. There's nothing Blackwood can do to us now that undoes what's already in motion." She held his gaze. "And if we ride openly, anyone who sees us sees that we're not running anymore." It was a good argument and a risky one simultaneously, which was a combination Cole had been learning to live with for the past week. "Road," he said. They hit the valley road at a pace that was not hurrying and not dawdling. 3 people with a destination, riding in the clear morning light. They passed a farm wagon heading north. The driver looked at them, and Cole nodded, and the man nodded back, and that was the entirety of it. They were 4 miles south of the Blackwood Ranch property when they saw the riders coming north, 3 of them, moving fast. Cole recognized the one in front from the ranch yard, one of the regular hands, a man named Garrett, who had been with Blackwood for years and was the kind of man whose loyalty was a function of proximity to power. "Keep riding," Cole said quietly. "They're going to stop us," Abel said. "Let me handle that," Cole said. Garrett pulled his horse across the road when they were 20 yards out, a blocking move, practiced, deliberate. The 2 men with him spread to either side, not guns drawn, but hands near. "Abel," Garrett said. "Where are you going?" "South," Abel said. "Personal business." "Mr. Blackwood wants everyone at the ranch," Garrett said. "There's a meeting." "Then Mr. Blackwood can have his meeting," Abel said. "I'll be back when I'm back." Garrett's eyes moved to Cole, then to Evelyn. Something shifted in his face, a calculation, not unlike the one the hired men had made 2 nights ago, but this one had different variables. He was looking at 3 people on a road in open daylight, and he was thinking about what it meant that they were here and not hiding. "You've got no business on this road, Donovan," he said. "I've got every business on this road," Cole said. "It's a public road." He kept his voice entirely ordinary, the way you'd speak to someone who had said something mildly incorrect about the weather. "Move aside, Garrett. I've got orders. From a man who assaulted a woman in his own kitchen and is currently the subject of a fraud investigation by the Territorial Attorney's Office," Cole said. He said it at normal conversational volume, loud enough for everyone on the road to hear, including the farm wagon that was now stopped 50 yards north watching the exchange. "Whatever he's paying you, Garrett, it stopped being worth it about 48 hours ago, and you're smart enough to know that." Garrett stared at him. The 2 men flanking him exchanged a look that Cole caught in his peripheral vision, the quick, sideways communication of people who are reassessing in real time. "Garrett," one of them said, not Evelyn's name, not Cole's, just Garrett's name, with a weight in it that said, "I am not sure I want to be part of this particular decision." Garrett's horse shifted under him, responding to something in his rider's body that his face wasn't showing yet. Then he moved aside, not gracefully, not with any sign of having arrived at a principled position. He moved aside the way men move when the arithmetic has come out against them, and they're not quite willing to admit it's arithmetic. Cole rode past him without looking back. Evelyn and Abel followed. The 3 of them continued south on the valley road, And behind them, after a long moment, Cole heard the sound of Garrett's party turning their horses and heading back north. Evelyn waited until they were a full mile further south. Then, "That's twice you've done that." "Done what?" Cole said. "Talked your way past armed men who should have stopped you." "I didn't talk my way past anyone," he said. "I just said the accurate thing in a direct way. People generally respond to accuracy when they can see it." "Most people find accuracy threatening," she said. "Only when they're on the wrong side of it," he said. She almost smiled. He caught the edge of it. The stage south left Greer's Crossing at noon, and they were on it. Cole had bought 3 tickets with most of what he had in his coat pocket, and Evelyn had added her savings pouch without comment, and together it was enough with some left over. Abel had his own money. They loaded onto the stage with no ceremony and very little conversation, and as the vehicle lurched into motion and Black Ridge began to fall away behind them, Cole watched the territory he'd lived in for 9 years receding through the window and tried to understand what he was feeling about that. It was complicated. Most true things were. Abel slept for the first 2 hours of the ride, which told Cole more about the man's actual state than anything he'd said. The sleep of someone who had been holding themselves together through sustained effort and had finally found a moment where it was safe to let go. Evelyn sat across from Cole and watched the country moving past, and neither of them spoke much because there wasn't much left to plan, and the things that remained to be said were the kind that didn't belong to a stagecoach with a sleeping witness 3 feet away. About halfway to the next relay station, she said, "I keep thinking about what Gideon said to me. When he was—" She stopped. "He said I was nothing, that everything I had was because he allowed it." She looked at her hands. "And the thing is, in a material sense, he wasn't wrong. I had nothing that was purely mine." "You had what you knew," Cole said. "Yes," she said. "And he didn't value that because he couldn't see it." She paused. "Men like him can only measure what they can take away. Property, money, position, things you can remove." She looked up. "He never understood that you can't take away what someone knows, what they've learned, what they carry in their head." A pause. "Those documents existed because I paid attention to things he didn't think I was capable of understanding." "He underestimated you," Cole said. "Consistently," she said. "And I let him because it was safer." She was quiet for a moment. "I've been thinking about that, about the ways you make yourself smaller to survive something, and how hard it is to remember afterward that you did it on purpose, that the smallness was a strategy, not a fact about who you are." Cole thought about that. He thought about it seriously because it deserved serious thought. "Do you still feel small?" he said. She considered the question with the honesty she brought to most things. "No," she said, "not anymore." Then, "Not for the last several days at least," which is its own kind of information. Cheyenne was 2.5 days south, with relay changes and an overnight at a station midway. The overnight was a plain room with 2 beds. Evelyn took one, Cole took the other. Abel found a spot in the stable because he said he slept better with animals, which Cole privately suspected was less about preference and more about giving them privacy, and which he appreciated without saying so. They talked that night longer than they had anywhere, without the pressure of immediate threat making every word functional. Cole told her about his family, the fire, when he was 16, the particular quality of rebuilding a life when the people you'd expected to build it with were gone. He told it plainly, without performing the grief, just describing the facts and what they'd meant for the years afterward. She told him about the years between losing her father and arriving at Blackwood's ranch. 3 years of moving from household to household, doing work that was available, which was the kind of work that didn't pay well and left you visible to the wrong kind of attention. She told him about a man in one of those households, she named no names, who had tried to make her situation resemble Gideon Blackwood's situation, and about how she had handled it, which had involved a cast iron pan and a very direct conversation that had ended the matter. Cole listened to this and felt 2 things simultaneously, something hot and protective that he kept carefully managed, and something that was simply respect, direct, and uncomplicated. "You've been managing this territory's worst men for a long time," he said. "Someone has to," she said. It was dry and tired and a little funny, and they both acknowledged that with the kind of shared quiet that stands in for laughter when you're too tired for the real thing. "Evelyn," he said. "I know," she said. "You don't know what I was going to say." I know approximately what you were going to say, she said. She looked at him across the plain room with the lamplight doing its limited best. And I want to tell you something before you say it. He waited. I'm not going to be someone's project, she said. I'm not going to be the woman you rescued who is grateful in the ways that make things convenient for you. I'm not built for that, and I wouldn't want to be, and if that's what this is, we should say so now. She held his gaze. But if what this is two people who have spent a week in extreme circumstances and have found out something real about each other in the process, and who are wondering whether that something real holds up when the circumstances normalize, then I'm interested in finding out. Cole was quiet for a moment. That's the most accurate description of the situation I've heard, he said. Good, she said. I'd like to find out, he said. So would I, she said. She blew out the lamp. He lay in the dark and looked at the ceiling and listened to the relay station doing its night sounds. And he thought about 40 acres on a north ridge and a south-facing slope with good soil, and about the very long distance between where you start and where you end up, and whether the distance is navigable without the specific person lying 6 feet away from you in the dark. He thought it probably was. He also thought he didn't want to find out. Hargrove's office was on the second floor of a stone building on the main street of Cheyenne, and the man himself was at his desk when they arrived, which was either good fortune or a sign that territorial attorneys in ambitious territories kept long hours. He was younger than Cole had expected, early 40s, dark-haired, with the organized desk of someone who dealt in paper and understood its power. He stood when they came in and looked at the three of them with the assessing attention of a man who had learned to read a situation quickly. Webb was already there. He was sitting in a chair against the wall, and he stood when he saw them, and the expression on his face was the specific relief of someone who has been carrying something heavy and has just seen the person he was supposed to hand it to. They made it, he said, to no one in particular. We made it, Cole said. Abel set his journal on Hargrove's desk and explained what it was and who he was without being asked. Hargrove listened without interruption, which Cole appreciated. Then Hargrove picked up the journal and opened it and read 3 pages, not quickly, not performing reading, actually reading, and then set it down and looked at them all. I've had this case for 2 years without the material to build it, he said. What you've brought me in the last 24 hours is, he stopped, choosing the word. Sufficient, he said, more than sufficient. Will it hold up? Evelyn said. Hargrove looked at her. He seemed to take in the cut on her cheek, healed now but still visible, and the quality of how she was standing, which was the quality of someone who had already paid for this answer and wanted it straight. If Mr. Abel testifies in person, and if the additional complainants Webb has assembled are willing to stand up in court, and if the document analysis you wrote is entered as evidence, yes, Hargrove said, it will hold up. He paused. There's one complication. He's going to run, Cole said. We believe he may already be running, Hargrove said. He turned to his desk and picked up a telegram. I received this an hour ago from the sheriff at Black Ridge, a new sheriff, I should note, appointed 3 days ago when the previous one resigned under circumstances that are becoming clearer by the hour. According to this, Gideon Blackwood left his ranch this morning by private horse, headed east, alone. No wagon, light provisions. The room was quiet. How far east can he get? Webb said. Depends on where his money is and how it's arranged, Hargrove said. He was already moving, reaching for his coat, opening a drawer. I'm filing for an arrest warrant this afternoon. I'll have it telegraphed to every station east and south within 2 hours. A fugitive warrant is a different instrument than a summons. It travels faster and it doesn't expire. He looked at Cole. He's not gone yet. And if he crosses the territorial line, Evelyn said. Then we pursue extradition, Hargrove said. It's slower. But with this, he gestured at the accumulated evidence on his desk. It's not in doubt. He can run. He cannot hide well enough or long enough. He looked at each of them in turn with the directness of someone who understood what this moment had cost the people in front of him. What he built, we will dismantle. Every fraudulent transfer will be reviewed, property returned where possible, compensation sought where return isn't. He paused. It will take time, the law takes time, but it will happen. Evelyn looked at the desk, at the documents, Abel's journal, the evidence of 6 years of systematic predation laid out in paper and ink, and something in her face did a thing that Cole had not seen it do before. Not quite tears. She was not a woman who arrived at tears easily, but something in the vicinity of them. The specific expression of someone who has been carrying a weight for a very long time and has just been permitted to set it down. She set it down. He saw her do it. He didn't say anything about it. It took 4 months. Hargrove had not exaggerated either the certainty or the slowness of it. Gideon Blackwood was apprehended at a rail station in Nebraska 6 days after he left Black Ridge, carrying a leather satchel containing $11,000 in currency and a false name on a new document that turned out to have been purchased from a forger in Denver. He was returned to Wyoming under territorial escort and held without bail pending trial, on the grounds that he had already demonstrated his willingness to flee. The trial took 6 weeks and produced a verdict that surprised nobody who had been paying attention. 7 complainants testified in person. Abel's journal was entered in full. Evelyn's written analysis of the land documents was read into the record by Hargrove himself. The assessor's clerk testified about the approach Blackwood had made 3 years prior. Rosa Whitman from the Black Ridge boarding house testified last, and she was so precise and so composed that the defense attorney stopped cross-examining her after 4 questions because it was making things worse. Blackwood was convicted on 11 counts of fraud, 2 counts of assault, and 1 count of witness intimidation, relating to an incident from 2 years prior that Hargrove had managed to attach to the case through Abel's testimony. He was sentenced to 14 years. His property was seized and placed under territorial administration, pending the review and remediation of fraudulent transfers. Elias Greer got his land back, not without a legal process that took 3 additional months, but in the end, the 40 acres with the river access was returned to him with a formal territorial acknowledgement that the original transfer had been unlawful. He did not cry when he signed the papers, but Martha, who had accompanied him, did, and neither of them was embarrassed about it. Cole's border dispute was resolved in his favor by a territorial land court, which found that Blackwood's encroachments on the northern boundary had been intentional and systematic and directed Cole to bill the territorial administration for the cost of any fencing or survey work done to correct the damage. He did not expect to actually receive that money, but he submitted the bill on principle, because the principle mattered even when the outcome was uncertain. He went back to the 40 acres in early spring. The house was intact. Blackwood men had not bothered with it, which suggested either that it wasn't worth the effort, or that some of them had retained a sense of what lines shouldn't be crossed, even in the absence of moral instruction from above. The north pasture was overgrown in the way that pastures get when they've been left without attention through a winter, and 2 sections of the east fence had come down in a January storm, and the roof on the small barn had developed a leak that would need to be addressed before summer. He started with the fence, because you always start with the fence. Evelyn came 10 days after he did. She arrived on a horse she'd bought with her own money, a sensible gray mare, younger than Patchy, but with similar patience. And she came with a canvas bag of seeds and seedlings wrapped in damp cloth that she'd apparently been nursing through the journey south. She rode into the yard where Cole was working on the east fence, and she looked at the property the way she'd looked at things when she was cataloging them for future use. "The south slope," she said. "You said it gets morning light all the way through." "It does," he said. "I want to see it," she said. He showed her. The south slope in April was not yet what it would be. The grass was still winter pale, the soil cold enough to see your breath over when you turned it. But the aspect was right, and she walked it with the focused attention of a gardener reading land, and she found the best section by some internal calculation he couldn't follow, and stood there looking at the mountains above and the valley below and the sky doing its spring business overhead. "This will work," she said. "I hoped you'd think so," he said. She turned to look at him. She was not the same woman who had been locked in a bedroom in Gideon Blackwood's house. Or she was, but more so. More of whatever she had always been. Her face had healed. The scar on her cheek was there and would stay there, a thin, pale line that she regarded, when she mentioned it at all, with something close to equanimity. She had spent the winter in Cheyenne working for Hargrove's office. He'd asked her to, recognizing what her memory and her analytical eye were worth, and she'd arrived at the spring with money she'd earned and a reputation in that office as someone whose work you could rely on. She was not grateful. She was not soft. She was not in any way diminished by what had happened to her, which Cole had suspected from the beginning was the truth of her and had now been confirmed by 4 months of watching from a distance that was not quite far enough to stop being interested. I'm not moving in, she said. I want to be clear about that. I'll build something on the east side of the property, or we can find an appropriate arrangement. But I'm not. I know, he said. I'm not going to be Evelyn, he said. I know. He looked at her steadily. I'm not asking you to be anything other than what you are. I've seen what you are. I like what you are considerably. He paused. We'll figure out the arrangements. She looked at him for a long moment with the expression that was her version of deciding to trust something. It was not a casual expression. It was work, visible as work, which he understood because trust was work when you'd spent enough years in situations that punished it. All right, she said, we'll figure out the arrangements. They went back to the fence because it needed finishing, and she helped without being asked because that was also what she was. And together they worked through the afternoon in the particular comfortable silence of two people who have stopped needing to fill the space between them with performance. There is something that people who have survived genuinely difficult things understand that other people sometimes don't, which is that resilience is not a dramatic quality. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't look like strength in the way that stories usually depict strength, with clean lines and clear victories and people standing on hilltops with the wind in the right direction. What it actually looks like is someone getting up in the morning and fixing the fence that came down in January. It looks like seeds wrapped in damp cloth on a horse's back, nursed through a long journey on the theory that the ground at the other end is worth planting in. It looks like two people in a field at the end of a long afternoon, working in the same direction without needing to discuss it. Evelyn Mercer had said no to a man who expected never to hear it. That no had cost her everything she had at the time and had turned out to be the most valuable thing she'd ever done. Not because it led to rescue. She hadn't been rescued. Not really. She'd walked out of her room and onto a horse with a man who had the sense to get out of her way and help when she needed it. But because the no was proof of something she'd stopped being certain about during 18 months of managed smallness, that she was still fully herself, intact and functional and capable of wanting things on her own terms. That was worth more than the $40 Gideon Blackwood had budgeted to recover her. Worth more than his ranch, his influence, his 14-year sentence in a cell that would age him faster than the Wyoming frontier ever had. Cole Donovan understood, on some level he hadn't articulated but had felt clearly from the morning he'd walked through a kitchen door and chosen not to walk back out, that the life you build matters more than the life that happens to you. He had built one life and lost it to fire, and built another one with his own hands, and then had a third one arrive without warning on a day when he'd only come to settle a fence dispute. The fence dispute, in the end, had mattered less than every other thing that happened that morning. He did not think of himself as a brave man. He had walked out the front door at 2 armed trackers and talked them out of their purpose, but he would tell you that was calculation, not courage. He had crossed a kitchen floor and hit a powerful man, but he would tell you that was reflex, not heroism. What he actually believed, though he would not have put it in these words, was that most of the genuinely important decisions in a person's life are not dramatic. They are small. They happen in the space between one action and the next, in the choice to keep walking when you could stop, in the decision to say the accurate thing in a direct way and let the consequences arrange themselves. The consequences in his case were 40 acres on a north ridge, a south-facing slope being mapped by a woman with seeds in her bag and plans in her head, a gray-brown mare named Patchy who deserved a rest she was unlikely to get, and the specific knowledge that tomorrow would require more fence work and that he was not unhappy about this. They married the following autumn in a ceremony notable for its brevity and its guest list, which consisted of Horace Webb, Martha Greer, Doc Aldridge, Eli Greer, Frank Abel, and Rosa Whitman from the boarding house, who brought a pie that turned out to be the best thing anyone ate that year. There was no formal location. They stood in the yard of the 40-acre ranch on a cold, bright October morning with the mountains visible in every direction, and they said what they meant to each other with no decoration, and that was sufficient. Abel had stayed in the territory after the trial, taking work at a smaller ranch 20 miles south, run by a man he trusted. He was working toward his own piece of land, slowly. Webb had expanded his supply business into 2 neighboring counties now that Blackwood's chokehold on the territory's commerce had been removed. Eli Greer was running cattle on his recovered land with the focused intensity of someone making up for lost time. The garden on the south slope came in the following spring, slowly, imperfectly, with 2 full rows of tomatoes that failed to thrive in the soil's first year, and had to be replanted with amendments she worked out through methodical trial rather than prior knowledge. The peppers did better. The fruit trees were a 3-year project. She understood that, and she was at peace with it, because things worth building are always 3-year projects at minimum, and the impatience you feel in year 1 is part of what you're learning to work with. The ranch grew by careful increments, not dramatically, not into something that would have impressed Gideon Blackwood, who had built his empire through predation and speed, and was now growing smaller and older in a territorial prison, but into something solid and specific and belonging to the people who had made it, which is the only kind of ownership that holds. On a morning in the second spring, Cole stood on the porch before Evelyn was up and looked at the mountains and thought about what the last 2 years had cost and what they'd produced, and he tried to be honest with himself about both. The cost was real. He'd nearly died twice, lost months of work, nearly lost the land itself. The scar on Evelyn's cheek was not going anywhere. What had been done to her in that kitchen was not something that became smaller with time. It was something you learned to carry without letting it determine the shape of every day. What he thought, standing there in the spring air with the mountains going through their slow morning business, was that the difference between a bad end and a good one is often thinner than people want to believe. It had been thin, in their case. A fence dispute that happened on a different day would have meant he never walked through that door. A heavy sleep that kept him from hearing the sound from inside the house. 2 hired men who calculated differently about their own interests. You could not live in that thinness, in the knowledge of how easily it goes the other way, and remain the same person you were before you understood it. He had not remained the same person. He didn't think that was a bad thing. He heard her behind him before she reached the door. Her specific footstep, which he knew now the way you know the sounds of a place you've lived in long enough. She came out with 2 cups and gave him one without speaking, and stood beside him looking at the same mountains, and neither of them felt any need to fill the morning with words it didn't require. The south slope was green. The garden was waking up in its second-year confidence, the amended soil finally doing what she'd known it was capable of. Somewhere down in the east pasture, Patchy was conducting her morning routine with the regal indifference of a horse who has outlasted everyone's low expectations of her. "The tomatoes," Evelyn said, after a while. "What about them?" he said. "I think they'll hold this year," she said. "The soil's different. You can feel it." "I'll take your word for it," he said. "I'm not a soil person." "No," she said. "You're a fence person." "I'm a fence person," he agreed. She leaned against him slightly, with the ease of someone who had decided that this was a place worth leaning. He put his arm around her with equal ease, because that was also what this had become. 2 people who had arrived at each other through a combination of circumstance and choice and stubbornness, and the specific luck of having been honest when it cost something, and had found that what they'd built was not perfect and was not finished, and was, for both of them, enough. The morning continued. The mountains were the mountains. The garden did what gardens do when you've given them the right conditions and enough time, which is to say it grew.